Today's meeting of the Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board is called to order.
Oh, okay. I see 8:56. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. I thought we were before.
It's 9 a.m.
Okay.
It's called to order on February 13th, 2024. Welcome, everybody. The agendas of today's meeting are on the wall at the entrance to the chamber. Please remember to turn off your cell phones. To ensure a complete record of the board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak clearly state your name, spell your last name for the clerk. I will ask the board members to introduce themselves and identify the fields they each represent. Ms. Byers?
Linda Byers, a resident.
David Harder, Affordable Housing.
Lindsay Dacus Harrison, real estate.
Kevin Chenault, nonprofit providers.
And I'm your board chair, Robin Field. I represent the lending industry as it relates to affordable housing. Item 2.1, our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the board's January 9th, 2024 meeting. May I have a motion to approve item 2.1?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 3, is there anyone here to speak on items not on today's agenda? If so, please step to the podium and state your name and spell your last name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak on a subject that is not on today's agenda. Seeing no one coming forward, Ms. Call, do we have any e-comments?
No, ma'am.
We will move on to the next item. Item 4.1, to discuss the changes to the City of Clearwater Public Service and Public Facilities programs. Mr. Lane will lead us in this discussion.
Thank you. For the record, Chuck Lane, Assistant Director, Economic Development and Housing Department. So we had this a discussion at our last meeting on January 9th. We talked about the changes that we were proposing to our CDBG program, really our public services and public facilities programs, and the potential for us to establish priorities for certain projects. We had a good discussion, and I told the board that I would report back at this meeting today. The board then suggested that I invite potential applicants to attend or view the meeting online remotely so they can learn of the changes to our CDBG program. So I've done that. I've sent an email to a distribution list that we maintain that captures hopefully all the folks that might be interested in our program, all of those nonprofits. In the email, I sent links for them to view the meeting online on the city's website and on the city's YouTube channel. Following my presentation, I believe the chair will open public comment for this item. So anyone present or viewing remotely will have the opportunity to provide comment or ask questions about our discussion, okay? So for those viewing remotely, you'll need to go on the city's website using the link that I provided under upcoming events. The NAHAB meeting, this meeting is listed, Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board. To the right of that, there is a link to provide an e-comment. So you tap that link and you can provide comment, and that will be read by the city clerk during the public comment period, okay? So I've asked Ms. Sanderson to be the sit in the sidecar here. In case I come up short on anything I'm trying to present. I want to make sure we get this right and our folks know what we're trying to do with our program so we can get good quality applications. So tomorrow we're going to begin receiving applications for funding for our 24-25 program year, okay? We'll accept applications through March 15th. The program year will begin on October 1st. The 24-25 program year will be it's going to be the 8th year that I've managed the 8th program year that I've managed in this role. It's gone by pretty quickly. Isn't that something, Kevin? You've been there the whole time. Over that time, and even prior to that time, I really kind of carried forward what we had done before. We've been very inclusive with the number of applicants that we've accepted. Basically, if the applicant qualified, we found a way to fund what they requested, okay? And that's been a good thing in that it's created a lot of diversity in our program. We've had a lot of different types of programs and services that were offered to our residents through our CDBG program. But it's also had it created some challenges for us. It's, with fewer amounts, we have lower funding, right? So, our public services, we typically have somewhere around $130,000 that we're able to provide towards public services. We have 7, 8, 10, 12 organizations. Do the math. There's just not a lot of funding per organization. And the requirements we have in our program for reporting and the things that our applicants need to do to stay compliant is very onerous. And for a small amount of money, sometimes the bang might not be worth the buck, and we've seen some of that. It's also very staff intensive in my office to manage these things. We have to approve all of those submittals, those monthly reports, and we have to make sure they're done correctly. And the other thing is, too, it's HUD's preference. Now, we've pretty much funded, for the most part, the same organizations year over year, and that's allowable under HUD. But HUD's preference is that this is seed money, right? That we provide this money to organizations, they get projects going, and then they're able to operate on their own without that funding over time. HUD also wants us to fund projects that create new services to our residents, or expansion of existing services to our residents. So those are the things that our program is going to prioritize. So if you bring a new service, or if you're helping additional people with your program, that application is going to score higher in this year's program. Okay, we're also going to have more funding. Up until now, we've had a maximum request of $25,000 in our public service program. We are now going to have a minimum request of $25,000 in our public service program. Okay, so we're going to have fewer applicants, higher dollars, more impactful projects. We've always had impactful projects, but hopefully we'll be able to serve more folks working with organizations. We're also seeking. We'd like to see organizations partner with one another, so they can provide a broader array of services under the same contract. So that's something that we would like to see as well. Anything Denise to add on the public services side?
Maximum is 50,000.
Maximum is 50,000. Okay. So with that, we could potentially have as few as 3 programs. Okay. All right. So public facilities. Public facilities is really a challenge, but it's very important to our program because that is how we help our nonprofits more than anything. We're limited in providing public service money to 15% of our allocation, which, as I told you earlier, is about $130,000. We are unlimited with public service funding. So public facilities funding, I apologize. That's how we're able to help our nonprofits. So these nonprofits that deliver services, we can help them improve their facilities, and that in turn will help them provide a higher level of service. So we do that quite a bit. In the past, we've had, well, let me back up a moment. The challenge with public services is, with construction projects, we all know there's delays, right? And there's always issues that kick the can down the road. And what that does is that challenges us with timeliness. Beginning of August of every year, we have to spend down our funding. If we have more than 1.5 times our annual distribution that we haven't spent, we fail the timeliness test. And our public facilities program is the program that challenges us to meet that deadline every year. Starting on 10/1, it's kind of an awkward time to start because you roll right into the holidays. So oftentimes we've seen organizations kind of delay till after the holidays. We're in the second quarter before we even, open up, take the cap off the pen, right? So that's something that needs to change. So we're going to be looking for public facilities projects that are ready to go on 10/1. They're right in that starting gate, and they're ready to hear that starting pistol go off and ready to go. We're looking for organizations with capacity, like we always do. Capacity is an indicator of resilience and their ability to sustain. That said, we are going to increase our funding amount in public facilities to a maximum request of $190,000. It used to be, we've had years it was 90 and years it was 95. We're going to increase it to $190,000. We understand even the nonprofits with decent capacity will have trouble maybe writing $50,000, $60,000 checks to a contractor, and then wait for us to reimburse them. That's what we've typically done. So we're going to provide that money in advance to help our nonprofits a little bit in that area. Again, we're looking for projects that in turn provide new or expanding services to our nonprofits. Very importantly, we're looking for projects that will begin on 10/1, and we know that they can get done timely. That's very, very important to us. One thing we've done with our public facilities programs is if funding was available, we would accept projects throughout the year, applications throughout the year for projects. We're not going to do that this year. We want to have every dime budgeted on these projects right at the beginning. Anything to add, Denise? Public facilities? Okay. So I'm going to open it up to the board for any questions. I think these changes are important. I think they're going to help us manage a better program, take a little stress off our staff, maybe take a little bit of stress off some of our partners that we're funding. I think there's some good changes. So, yes.
Can you explain again? I'm a little confused about the timeline. You know, the applications start in March, I believe, and then they're approved, but then they don't start, they have to start construction by October?
Okay, that's a great question. So the timeline, so over the next month, we'll be accepting applications. And then there's a lengthy process we go through before we get council to approve our allocations. Ultimately, they're approving our annual action plan, which has all of those allocations in it. And that will be late July, early August. And at that point, we'll notice all of our successful applicants that they're being funded, okay? All the while, we're doing the things that HUD requires. We're doing environmental reviews. We're preparing the contracts. So on 10/1, everything should be in place. And on 10/1, the first things our public facilities partners will be doing will be working with us to put out a notice to bid. And we might even try to start working with them prior to 10/1. So the first week of October, we can get those notices out. And hopefully we can get under contract with some of these projects even prior to Thanksgiving, which would be a great way to go. We've always struggled to get these projects really out of the starting gate. Does that answer your question? Okay, terrific.
Chuck, I want to applaud you, especially in what you were just saying about trying to get things lined up ahead of time. I know that some agencies have contract signature issues, and getting the work ahead of time will allow them to be able to get all that signed and done ahead of time. So we appreciate that. I also appreciate the thoughts that were put in by staff for public service. I like the idea of being able to help at a little bit higher level, and even though it may be less agencies we're helping, I think we'll be giving a larger impact to the citizens of Clearwater. So I like the ideas of the changes that you're proposing.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
I also like the partnership between the agencies. They come to an agreement between the two parties and they get more funding because it's two agencies, they get more funding. So
Yeah.
I like that idea too. That's a great idea.
Well, some of the groups that we've been funding year in and year out, it may be an opportunity for one of those organizations to continue in our program if they're partnering with someone else that's providing a new service, perhaps.
Have you, just going on that same thought pattern, have you thought about the process of doing that? Are you requiring it to be one application as a partnership?
Yes.
Or two separate? Okay.
One application as a partnership. Any other questions or comments on what we're trying to do? Okay. We'll see if the public
I
has
have
any.
one other question. So the maximum is $190,000 for public facilities?
Correct.
And then they leverage that with a bank loan or some other type of funding as well? Or
There's opportunity for them to bring other funding to that project. Our funding is a grant. If they have a larger project, $300,000 project, and we're a portion of it, yes, they would have to show us that they have the ability to bring that other funding to the table. And we can co-fund projects with the county. They have CDBG money as well. In fact, I believe next year's cycle, one thing we're going to try to do, and I need to coordinate with the county on this, is we may try to align our application process. So if there is a project that wants funding from us and the county, they have the same time window to submit that application. So,
Is there then an interlocal agreement between the county and the city?
no, they'll have a subrecipient agreement with the organization, and we will too. But we'll coordinate with the county very closely on what portion we'll fund and what portion they'll fund, and make sure we're not duplicating any benefits.
For public facilities, there's no leverage requirement in the application, though.
There's not, but it makes an application look stronger.
Right.
Did you have anything to add?
The only other thing I wish to add is, within the application itself, we're now putting the points distribution
good.
and providing some additional guidance on each segment of those applications. So they'll know where they need to invest the most amount of time, where they need to provide detail, and they'll very clearly know where our priorities are throughout that application itself. You know, more points here versus there. Spend your time on the things that are more important to us, please.
Do you have to spend staff time doing inspections before do they draw down that?
We have yes, we have a contract inspector that goes out and evaluates every time they put in a draw, put in for funding. And we may have to adjust that now that we're prepaying, but we inspect all along the way. There are projects that have to pull permits with the city. That's independent from our review. Our review is kind of a deeper review. The city reviews the building department. They review against Florida building code. We review against workmanship and kind of other things. Like, for example, if there's a pencil line on a wall, the building department isn't going to address that, but we'll address that as workmanship, and it's something that should be fixed.
Do they provide you a draw schedule, or is it just based on any time they call for a draw, you do an inspection, or do they have a draw schedule?
We have in the past. We've done, I think, 30, 60, 90, but with this new program, we're going to have to readdress that. I don't think we've gotten into that level of detail. We'll address that when we develop our contract. But yeah, we'll try to keep them on some level of the schedule so we're not inspecting draws that are for, $400.
Plus, you know where you are during the construction. You want to make that timeliness, so you want to make sure you've got the money out.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I think what we're envisioning, to Chuck's point, is we'll advance some measure of money, but hold back the last 10% till the project is complete. That portion will be on a reimbursement basis. But that contract inspector, which, by the way, that's in addition to the $190,000, we paid for that separately. So that is not part of the $190,000 grant. So that contract inspector will go out there and will authorize payment to contractor, so that nonprofit can then pay the contractor based on what that inspector has reviewed and approved for payment.
I would imagine it with public facilities, I would imagine that both the project schedule and the payment schedule would be involved in the application itself, critical components of construction. Also, from a payment schedule and inspection schedule, if there is a way to incorporate, monthly pay applications and to get in the cycle of payment for work in place on a monthly basis, it becomes much more consistent from that perspective as far as the construction industry goes, because that's just how the larger projects work. It's just work in place on a monthly basis, inspection, and then payout from that perspective.
It really depends on the work that's being done. Some of the contractors will require some payment in advance for acquisition of materials, procurement of materials as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So it does vary depending on the project that is being considered. And that gets incorporated into the agreement that is ultimately executed with the nonprofit. So that bid, as the contractor has provided and that nonprofit has agreed to, that will detail that payment schedule.
Yeah.
And the work in progress, those milestones that have been negotiated.
Yeah, perfect.
Have you seen any increased cost in construction? Because I understand HUD has some new restrictions that came about a couple of years ago as far as materials, so forth.
Are you talking about Build America, Buy America?
Yes.
That's one of the reasons we're keeping it under $200,000. That in Section 3, which are additional regulations that are quite onerous. So there is some intentionality in keeping that below 200. for those reasons alone. So Build America, Buy America, as you are probably aware, Ms. Byers, is challenging. It requires American-made products and is another layer of regulation that can be particularly challenging, not only for contractors under those regulations, but for the nonprofits, and certainly for the city in monitoring and managing those new regulations. CDBG has already adopted those. Home is coming, and this is referring to CDBG, but we'll see this impact as well on new construction of homes too. So we're not looking forward to the home program adopting the follow rules.
Some of the projects we fund with home, it's impossible to keep that subsidy under $200,000. So we will trigger those regulatory issues.
If you're partnering with the county and they've got 199,000 and you've got it, or whatever the total is, does it negate that requirement because you have two different funding?
I'll have to check that. That's a good question.
Good question, yeah.
Don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I don't want to go
If we
there.
get into a
We'll
co-funded
address it
project,
as it comes.
yeah, if we get into a co-funded project, we will certainly identify the rule regarding that.
I'm now going to open public comment for this item. I'll begin with those present at the meeting. If anyone wishes to come forward, please step to the podium, state your name, and spell your last name for the clerk. Seeing no one come forward, Ms. Call, do you have any e-comments? I will now close public comment. We will move to the next item. Discussion of the City Council presentation of the Residential Inventory and Housing Affordability Assessment Report by S.B. Friedman.
Can you steal your laptop, Rose?
Technology challenges this morning. Denise Anderson, Economic Development and Housing. So last week, SB Friedman was in town and provided this information to council, and wish to thank Mr. Schnault for being present for that. Camille Hebting as well was able to attend that, and of course Linda, you as well. We're able to be here for that discussion. I'm presuming you may have reviewed the report or may have witnessed the meeting after or online, but for the benefit of the public and for today's discussion, I wanted to hit some high points of this residential inventory housing assessment that was provided by SB Friedman, and ultimately get to where we landed with council in terms of prioritization, and then how we're going to work with you all going forward to address those prioritizations that were established. So bear with me because this is completely unscripted, so I'm just going to scroll through and hit the things that I think are important to talk about today. So this educational workshop really was about providing information related to demographic trends, talk about the economic base of the city of Clearwater, the existing housing inventory and housing that's available at different levels of affordability, and then determine the extent to which there's an affordability mismatch. And that became pretty evident as we looked at the data, that there is indeed a mismatch. So when we think of affordability, the way that SB Friedman approached this is on the rental side, the things that are included in rental, and the things that are included in ownership when we consider that 30% threshold. It's important to note here that our requirements might be a little bit different, and banking requirements might be a little bit different. But in terms of the data set that was provided by SB Friedman, and keeping in mind that they collect their data from public sources, this is how they evaluated that. So it may be a little bit different based on regulations or banking industry rules, if you will, on that front end ratio. I'll mention one of the things that I didn't catch when we reviewed this is not included in here, but I think it's important to note is all those other things that contribute to household expenses. One of them that is not listed that jumped out to me is childcare. And we know that that is an extraordinary burden on our young families in particular, not only because childcare is hard to find, but it's become extraordinarily expensive as a result. So that is another burden that is hitting our families. As we know, we have, in fact, under public services in this current fiscal year or program year, we're funding an organization that is out training home-based child care providers. If you'll recall, We Care, I think it's called. So, affordability versus cost burden, we looked at the data for this. Certainly lower income households are more right, it makes sense. They're more likely to be the most cost burdened. But in the city of Clearwater, I'm going to scoot on here, it's about 50% of our households are cost burdened, according to the data provided. So we'll get to that in a moment. The area median income for currently within the region is at $65,450. That's the 50% mark, if you will. And then we looked at different housing types. So we looked at legally restricted and naturally occurring affordable housing. The most prevalent form of naturally occurring affordable housing is mobile home parks, mobile homes themselves. And then our older, smaller homes, because of their footprint, because of their age and livability, might be considered naturally occurring as well. Legally restricted is the business that we're in, as you know, and is also the business that Clearwater Housing Authority and Pinellas County Housing Authority are in. So legally restricted are those that, as we know, it usually has a land use restriction tied to it for a period of affordability that the household occupying, whether rental or owned, must meet those qualifications at time of rental or at time of purchase. We also talked about workforce housing, and the way that SB Friedman approached this is anything over 60% is how they defined workforce housing, up to 120% of area median income. And then we asked them to look at the higher income housing. So we are the Economic Development and Housing Department, and from an economic development perspective, we needed to understand whether the mix of housing we have in the city of Clearwater is appropriate for the types of jobs that we're looking to retain and attract to the community. And what do we need to do to ensure that the full spectrum of housing is matched well with the types of industries and jobs that we support here, whether it's tourism-based industry, which are typically lower-paying jobs, or service industry, which are typically lower-paying jobs, or those very high-paying jobs that are typically associated with IT software and finance and insurance kinds of white-collar, if you will, professions. So this is based on a three-person household, and it gives you the income levels that are generally available at these different benchmarks, these different levels, if you will. And as we know in this group, when we look at housing affordability and we're qualifying households for rental or purchase, we look at the total number of households. So these figures change if it's a one-person household, if it's a five-person household, etc. These numbers change, as you know, and that information can be found on our website, myclearwater.com/housing. This gives you an idea of some of those professions at the varying levels of affordability, right? So at the very low income, we're looking at fast food and counter workers, EMT, preschool teachers, and the like. The higher end, we're looking at managers, software developers, civil engineers, etc. And then there's a lot that's right there in the middle too, right? So it's healthcare, firefighters, first responders, things of that nature. So this is a lot of color, and you probably have a hard time seeing the legend over there on the right-hand side, but really it's just showing you the number of people in the households. For a one-person household, the income levels, it just shows you how the income level changes depending on the number of people in the household and at the income level. So it's really just representative of things that I've already mentioned. I'm going to skip down here. So rent limits. The home value you can see here. I don't know of anybody that's able to find a home at $63,600 in today's market, a single-person household, or find rent limits of that same level. And then as you move down the spectrum, again, this is based on a three-person household. So this is a couple and a child, right, who's also likely dealing with child care, or a single parent who might be extraordinarily burdened with two in child care. On up to, the home value of greater than $231,000 for, again, three-person household. That's at 120% AMI, which is the maximum that our SHIP funding can support. We currently have no other funding available other than a one-time allocation for ARPA that we're almost out of. We have no other funding available to support over 80%. So extraordinarily difficult. And Lindsay, how many houses do you have available at $231,000 currently? Zero. Again, we're looking at the households. Hard to see perhaps for those watching out there in the public, but the hash marks adjacent the solid lines show you the number of units that are available and then the number of households that might qualify for those. So the only place where you really find the number of units exceeding the number of households looking for those units are on the upper end of the scale. So 120% AMI and at full market rate. And this is where that mismatch begins to become evident, correct? So we had a little game with council. I'm sure they enjoyed that. Fact or myth, right? I should mention, we looked at 14 different sub-areas because, as we know, Clearwater spans Bay to Beach, very different neighborhoods throughout the community. It does include some unincorporated lands because the way the data is pulled is through census tracts. So we looked at 14 sub-areas. So the city of Clearwater, those sub-areas I should say, which is largely comprised of the city of Clearwater, we have about 15% of the population, and we also have about 15% of the household. So there's some parity there. Study area gaining population at a faster rate than the county. That is a fact. So being fully built out, a little bit surprising perhaps that we are indeed growing a little bit faster than the rest of the county in terms of population growth. Average of 35 net new people move to Pinellas County every single day, mostly from states outside of Florida, areas outside of the state of Florida. But we also lose population, 7 net people to Pasco County every single day. And from an economic development perspective, we're seeing this in the employer base as well. So they're having employees who can't find homes here that are moving to Pasco County, and then ultimately Pasco County's got a lot of greenfield. Not only are they building houses, but they're planting a lot of businesses. And so once we lose them to Pasco County, there's a great deal of opportunity to lose that employee from the local business as well because they find opportunities close to home. This is not a new phenomenon for us, but it's a significant one. So we also looked at median household income and the compound annual growth rate. And you can see that income rose more slowly for renters. This is perhaps not surprising, but there's clear evidence of that. So in the study area, renters saw a 0.9% increase versus owners at 2.2%. One of the challenges with publicly sourced data is you can't get the data from yesterday. So this shows data through 2020. Total employment grew 23% in the last decade, 2010 to 2020. 1,300 new jobs per year, basically. What is also a threat in terms of economic development is only 23%, and also speaks to congestion on our road. Only 23% of those who live here also work here. I guess the good news is we have net in-migration, so more people are coming into our community to work than are leaving to work. So we still are seeing a net in-migration. When we looked at commute patterns back in 2011 for an economic development strategic planning effort that we were doing, we saw people traveling from as far away as Citrus County, from Polk County, and from Sarasota, Manatee as well, to commute every day, many of them to our beaches, which is extraordinary, right? And then as gas prices change, as costs change, people are moving to where they can best afford a place to live, but the cost of that commute is extraordinary. And though we didn't look at commute patterns for this particular study, I doubt that has changed. So getting into the inventory itself, so we looked at single-family detached, single-family attached, whether they be villas or townhomes or condos, multifamily buildings, smaller multifamily buildings, sometimes referred to as missing middle, larger multifamily, and then other, which is mobile homes or RVs, so those park models, if you will, part of that too. So you can see large multifamily, which we've seen mostly being constructed, right? So on our LIHTC program, the sweet spot is around 80 units. In this big boom that we've seen, you'll see them all along US 19. You're seeing very large projects coming out of the ground, 200, 300, 400 units. Then when we look at the distribution of single family and multifamily, you can see where it's all landing. And again, this data is a little bit dated. It goes to 2021 through American Community Survey, so it doesn't capture some of the newest bills that we've seen since COVID. And then we also looked at the share of renter-occupied households, et cetera. So again, difficult to see here. We have a greater share of renter-occupied households in the county, 37% to 31%. I think that was actually a little bit more surprising to me. I didn't expect to see that data. Then we also looked at housing tenure. So this is owner-occupied versus renter-occupied and the distribution of those. We don't need to spend time on that. We looked at the age and character. So most of our properties, and this contributes toward NOAA, were constructed between 1960 and 1980. Median year built was 1976. Then we looked at the cost of single-family housing. So no surprise, particularly to those in banking and real estate, that the cost of housing has skyrocketed. It is coming down perhaps a little bit. We're seeing a much tighter market in terms of inventory. Keep in mind that our SHIP funds are funded by dock stamps, so the transactions. So we've gotten word that our SHIP funding will likely be decreasing. Have we heard how much?
I don't know how much, but we get our allocation every year. When they tell us what it's going to be, it's an estimate. And then as depending on how the market does, it could go up and down. Last year we received more SHIP funding than we were originally thought. This year it will be less.
And legislation helped with that, certainly. More money was put into the system, but we are anticipating a decrease, which of course, we're not seeing a decrease in need, but we are anticipating a decrease, which of course really hurts us, particularly in our ability to support workforce housing, because that is the only funding source for over 80%. Oh, so, sorry, back to household earning $100,000 per year could afford the typical cost of a new construction home. That is a myth. You need to earn about $112,000 and have $60,000 saved. As you know, we provide purchase assistance. Sometimes we still call it down payment assistance, but we're trying to get to purchase assistance. We currently provide that. We're looking at increasing that. More to come as we finalize our LHAP, or we're looking to move that to $75,000, and that will align with the county. So there is some good news for qualifying home buyers. We can help with that amount that must be contributed to be able to afford cost of housing for homeownership, I should say. And then we looked at market rate multifamily, where is it located, et cetera. So, you can see that straight line coming from the beach all the way over to the bay. That's generally where Gulf to Bay is located. And then 19, you can see there, 11, 13, 14, you can see that's really where a lot of the multifamily housing is being constructed. Size of the bubble matters here as well in terms of how big those projects are. The blue, which you're not seeing much of, and again, the data here likely did not, well, it's as of August 2023, it did not, I presume, although I did not ask this question specifically, This only captured that which is considered delivered to the market, not under construction. So I think we're not seeing a couple of other projects that are currently under construction along US 19, but they would show up as a fairly large blue bubble as well. Factor myth, new multifamily development has 50% rent premium over units built prior to 2010. That is a fact. We're seeing this everywhere, right? Cost of rent. We're hearing that rental rates are starting to come down a little bit. I think because demand, I should preface this. I attended Tampa Bay Business Journal's Economic Outlook event, and within the Tampa Bay region, more than 26,000 multifamily units are under construction currently and expected to be delivered in 2024. That will help drive down rental costs, supply-demand equation, right? So that will help. They're not all being constructed, of course, in Clearwater, but we are anticipating some pressure, some downward pressure on rent rates. I'm going to skip through this. Mobile homes and manufactured housing. So we can typically not support mobile homes that were built prior to 1996. They must be constructed to new, post-Hurricane Andrew standards. So our funding SHIP, a great example, cannot be used to support rehabilitation of mobile homes that predate that. So that's a bit of a challenge. Most of our mobile homes, as you saw, they predate that, right? So we do have this ARPA funding that we're allowing for some of that. And we've recently met with the Urban League of Pinellas County. I think they are likely going to be the most able to help those extremely low income. They can support households over 2 times the poverty rate. It's usually around $30,000 or less. But some of those older mobile homes, perhaps that need weatherization and other things to help lower energy costs, some support out there. We're anticipating really being able to refer each other back and forth to some of these programs. So things that we cannot help or support with, we're hoping others like the Urban League may be able to support. But mobile homes as a sector of our housing universe is particularly challenging for us because of regulation and also because of the threat that mobile home parks will disappear. So there are 26 mobile home parks accounting for 84% of all mobile homes and manufactured housing units, and 19 out of those 26 have out-of-state owners. And yet there are only 3 that are resident owned, right? So this is a challenge. 3 of 26 units of 26 mobile home parks are resident owned, meaning people are paying lot rent in those 23 mobile home parks, largely owned by out-of-state owners who have perhaps no allegiance to the community. We are seeing this. We saw it with Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park. We saw that with Capri. I know that there is another, it's an RV park. It's not a mobile home park that's also likely to succumb to development. This is a significant challenge for us when we look at naturally occurring affordable housing, the most prevalent kind that we have in the city. So I've already sort of dispelled this, right? So half of all mobile home residents own their home and property. That, of course, is a myth. Only 6% have a homestead exemption. And then sort of where are they located? You'll have to remember the map that we saw. So when we get into housing affordability, this is broken down by legally restricted, NOAA, low income, middle income, and higher income. And now we're really going to get into this mismatch that we talked about. Lost 400 NOAA units between 19 and 21. Is that fact or myth? It is a myth. We actually lost 515 NOAA units, and again, that's more Capri, Southern Comfort primarily. And it's a process called filtering and filtering up. So, not that that's an important term to remember, but how does this filter up? So when people lose their home at a very low rent, they then have to make the very hard decision to pay more, and that's filtering up.
That's also a matter of property owners charging more.
Yep. So only 22% of all study area owner-occupied units are considered affordable to households making under 60% AMI. So this is that mismatch, and this is that filtering up. So what you have here in red are the number of households at these income levels that are seeking or occupying housing. And then in the gray-brown there to the left of that is how many households exist. And so on the left-hand side under owners, you see that there are almost 5,800 households qualifying homeowners, but only 4,400 homes that are available. Where it becomes extraordinary is in the rental market. No surprise, perhaps. We're seeing this everywhere. But as you move to that right-hand graph, 6,300 households at the under 30% AMI are seeking to occupy only 2,000 rental units that are available. That's a 3x plus difference, right? And you see those are the households that then filter up, that then make that difficult decision to pay more than 30% of their income for housing that they can attain at higher levels. And then you see it filtering up again. So those 30% moving into the 60% rental market, that 60% rental market is being forced into that 80% market, etc. We see these pressures all the time, right? It's also, of course, contributing to homelessness within the community. And though this study was not about homelessness, it's not a difficult correlation or deduction to make. So 40% of study area households are housing cost burden. And as I indicated earlier, it's 46% of owner-occupied. 46% of total households are housing cost burden, but 55% of those that are renter-occupied are facing that every day. So I'm going to go into really where we led this with our council. So throughout this study, these are the 7 unmet housing needs that were identified by the data. And these are not in rank order, but that is the activity that we asked council to do with us. So we see that entry-level for-sale homes, difficult to find, right? Can't find one under $231,000. Infill rental apartments, those are those missing middle, if you will, that go into our neighborhoods, rental apartments. Housing for lower income renters, they're being forced to filter up. Options for downsizing and aging in place, right? So that perhaps is the ADU, that's helping our mobile homes that are typically occupied by older, if you will, our retirement communities. Preservation of missing middle, that's those smaller units, typically 10 units or fewer in our neighborhoods. In fact, we hope we have an opportunity soon to help preserve a couple of missing middle rental properties soon. We're working with an investor in that arena. And then workforce housing, affordable area wages. So, and from council's perspective, workforce housing is, from this study, was 60 to 120%. And then strategies to prevent mobile home resident displacement. That's a really tough one, as we've seen. So we asked council to consider all of these things and to rank them. And this goes into some of that, recap some of that data that we've already talked about. We asked council to rank them, and I will share with you where they came out. So this is blind. They had 7 cards, put them in order of how they wish to rank them. So what you can see the priority order according to council: workforce housing, affordable at area wages. So again, from an economic development perspective, it should not be lost in this that we really need to be able to find housing, provide housing to the full spectrum of those who work in our community. And council agreed with that statement as well. But they also recognize housing for lower income renters is an extraordinary challenge and is also a very high priority. Infill rental apartments, ADUs is an example of that. Ranked 3rd. Entry-level for-sale homes was 4th. Options for downsizing in place, 5th. That's, again, can be more challenging for us. preservation of missing middle, and strategies to prevent mobile home resident displacement. I was a little bit surprised, actually. When you look at the highest rank and lowest rank, there was a great deal of consensus, particularly top two. There was full consensus across the entire council. I was very surprised by that. And at the seventh ranked one, there was near full consensus for that as well. Where it got a little wobbly for them was in the middle, right? Infill rental, entry-level for sales, and options for downsizing in place, and preservation of missing middle. Particularly 4, 5, and 6. A lot of wobble there amongst council in terms of how to prioritize. So what's really important message here is that these are all very high priorities for us. There are things that in our organization that we can do better or have more tools to support than in others, and I've mentioned mobile homes as an example. We have difficulty funding projects, rehabs of mobile homes. But partnering with organizations that can support that particular segment of NOAA's is important for us to establish those partnerships. So what are we doing about this? What's next, and what's you all's role in all of this? So just briefly, and I shared this with council as a follow-up to our discussion last week. I let them know kind of what we're working on, and all these things are sort of, there's a confluence of all these different efforts occurring at the same time. So currently, we are reviewing and updating our policies and procedures, and Ms. Byers, I heard you mention that earlier in your chat. We are going through all of our federal and state regulations to update our policies and procedures. It hasn't been done in quite some time. Of course, it's necessary. It's required by our funding sources, but it's a really good opportunity for us to make sure that what we're doing makes sense, it's efficient, it's effective, et cetera. So we're going through that. That's a 10-week process. We're currently in week 2, 3. So that'll be wrapping up in the next month and a half or so, and we'll have all of those updated. That will help feed into the update to our local housing assistance plan. So you remember you work sitting as the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. A local housing incentive strategy report was accepted by council. We're now going through that report to determine what we can implement in our local housing assistance plan. That plan must come forward in April to you all in early April, and then to council before the end of April for submittal to the state by May 2nd. So that's in this quarter. Yesterday, council heard from planning and development. They did a lot of research into accessory dwelling units, the pros and cons, the challenges to that, and made a series of recommendations to council. And Chuck, I'm going to ask that we can send that document to our board after this meeting. My understanding is that council effectively accepted all of those recommendations from planning and development. They've now been given direction to go forward and draft an ordinance which changes some codes for allowance and limitations to how ADUs can be constructed and utilized in the city of Clearwater. So that's coming forward in short order, and that of course speaks to some priorities that we have. We have contracted with Florida Housing Coalition to do an incentives evaluation. So all of those non-cash incentives, so I think density boost, some of those other things, expedited permitting, what is the cash value of our non-cash incentives? And then they'll be providing to us basically a calculator so that when we are working with developers, and this is going to be particularly helpful as we consider those projects that might come in under the Live Local Act, how do we evaluate the impact or what that developer is receiving as a result of the non-cash, non-subsidy incentives that we're providing, as well as those subsidy ones. But it's easy for us to say, well, this is the value of cash we're providing, but getting our finger on how much those non-cash incentives are really valued for a developer is the work that Florida Housing Coalition is doing for us. Additionally, they're evaluating all of the projects that are legally restricted for us and coming up with a monitoring plan. So as an example, Live Local prescribes that the local jurisdiction must be responsible for the monitoring of all of those units that are now allowed under state law. And yet the capacity for us to monitor potentially a great number of units with developers who likely have very little experience in affordable housing universe is rather daunting. So Florida Housing Coalition is looking at the monitoring, and from that we'll be able to determine if we need to outsource our monitoring, which is, I suspect, where we'll land, or at what point we outsource, or what types of projects we outsource our monitoring for. So that's coming toward us as well. It doesn't speak directly to these housing priorities, but speaks to our ability to support different types of projects, because monitoring is one of those staff-intensive things that can impact. And then finally, what we'll be bringing to you all is, we're taking all of what we heard last week. We're taking all of council prioritization, rank order, and we'll be coming back to you all and asking you to do some work on this. We'll be talking to you about the partnerships that we need to have, the resources perhaps that are needed, and then changes to our program, right? So as an example, workforce housing affordable at area wages. We had a conversation in November about whether or not to raise the max sales price to the state allowed max sales price for Pinellas County, so up to $481,000. We need to decide very, very soon, it's going to be incorporated into our local housing assistance plan, where we're going to land on that. I suspect we're going to land at that max and let the market determine it. But it's also, your comments in that meeting, Kevin, were appropriate. We do not wish to convey that $481,000 is really an affordable home for most people. That's not a good message. But we need to figure out how best to support, in every way that we can, housing affordability. And if the state allows us to go to $481,000, and there's mechanisms out there to be able to provide that to home buyers, then we'll let the market determine that, and the partners to figure that out. So I think that's where we're going to land. There are other things that come into consideration here, and we'll be talking about those to you over the next several months. Alongside, of course, all of our AAP processes, the applicants that will come forward under the program that Chuck just described, all of those things as well. So a lot of work coming at you over the next few weeks, or next few months, excuse me. I'm happy to take any questions, as would Chuck, I'm sure.
I just wanted to bring up, I was looking, what strikes me most is a lot of this data is from 2017 to 2021, and we see a huge mismatch, but then we all know what happened during COVID, so it scares me to know really where we are now with the numbers and the actual market that we're in. I would feel that this mismatch is way worse than what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that it's only gotten worse, right? Oh, one of the things, I'm sorry, that I failed to mention, tenant-based rental assistance. So one of the lower income rentals, one of the big challenges that Clearwater Housing Authority has had is finding landlords that are willing to accept vouchers. With tenant-based rental assistance, we'll be able to provide those first last that will help incentivize those landlords to take those voucher programs. That seems to be the major hurdle for many of them, because the voucher program, of course, pays the difference between what someone can afford and what the market is commanding. So the thing that is keeping many of these landlords from participating in this is getting that security up front, so that they can take perhaps a risk with somebody who may struggle otherwise, or the delay in payment from voucher systems, or so on and so forth. So I failed to mention that. That is, we finally gotten to final contract and expect that to be implemented very shortly, within the next several weeks. So, that's one of the other things that we're working on. And so it's been a long, heavy slog to get to that point, but we're about there now. So. To your point, this is publicly sourced data, reliance upon census and American Community Survey. Some of it is more recent with CoStar data and the like, but largely this is a bit stale, albeit a fresh report. So,
but the pain points that we're seeing post this data, we all kind of suspect what they are. We probably know pretty well what they are. I do believe the council's priorities are spot on. It certainly seems like that to me. And I don't think they would have changed had we had more recent data. So I think the exercise still achieved what we were trying to achieve.
The purchase limit caps for the down payment assistance program, how do those get updated? Because we're seeing the data of the average sale price here and just inventory in homes in general, because I know we're continually increasing the down payment assistance amount, but I think the real struggle is on the back end is the purchase price limits now. Is there even inventory of homes within those limits? It really, what I'm feeling with clients is when I use any down payment program, really the only option for them is not a single family home, is a condo. And then we're dealing with the HOAs and all of that, and condos qualifying with all the issues we're having with condos right now too. So what
Yes.
changes that purchase?
It does, and HUD establishes the max sales price for the home program, and it's currently at $342.
345, I think.
Yes.
349, 525.
Thank you, the banker.
Yeah.
Yes, so.
Or 526, it depends
Just
on
under
the jurisdiction.
$350,000,
Yeah.
so I did know that. So HUD establishes that limit, so we were quite surprised when SHIP came out with a max for Pinellas County at 481, right? Because that's a tough one. And unfortunately, you know, SHIP encourages home ownership, so that's a big bucket we can fill, but we also have to fill it for the extremely low income. There's 6 different categories in which we must meet certain benchmarks. So it would not be true for us to suggest that $481,000, which is going to be tough for any of our partners to figure out how to utilize, or really anything over 400, we may not have funding out of the SHIP program to support it as well. And home has if we use home funding, as we've already said, that's a lower cap. So, I think it's difficult certainly for anybody out there in the buying marketplace to understand all these rules and regs. Difficult for you all who are trying to make it work with your clients. Unfortunately, these are the deck, this is the deck of cards that we're all being given. So would I love to see some alignment between the feds and state? Absolutely. It'd be helpful for everybody. I don't anticipate that we'll see it anytime soon.
I want to applaud council for their comments when they were doing the prioritization too. All of these are priorities. Just because they ranked the 1 and 2 does not mean the others aren't important. And they made that clear last week. But for me as a provider of nonprofit, the biggest issue or the biggest challenge I'm seeing our clients affect is that filter up challenge. They're having to spend more than 30%. And then it creates issues all around financially where they're looking for assistance in other areas. And we don't have the type of assistance in the community to help these residents. I don't have an answer. But if we could get more affordable housing, especially in the rental side, makes a big difference. And I know that's a challenge, and I know it's a long-term solution, long-term issue. But that's what we're seeing on the nonprofit side of our clients coming to us. We have clients living in our units now who could easily go out into the community and get competitive housing, which then would free up our units, but they're having those rental issues. They can't find something they can afford. A lot of landlords are requiring the certain income to rent issues, and even if they've got enough money to saved up, they're not allowing them to move in. So these are challenges we're seeing from the lower income side of folks moving out.
Unfortunately, your story's not unique, right? We're hearing
Exactly.
it everywhere. Yeah.
Another thing that it seems that I've been fixating on lately is, affordability at point of sale is great. But the lower the income the family, the less disposable income they have. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And, the one example that is current and relevant is the ever-changing cost of home insurance. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I find that I struggle with in our office is the pressure at point of sale to determine affordability without even stopping to consider what's happening to this family's disposable income 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And we regularly walk around our office and we say, we're not here to our clients, we're not here to set you up to fail. And so we've got to be very careful in how we structure that point of sale affordability. And it's a real struggle because we're faced with the terror that these families have, that they're facing a once-in-a-lifetime chance now, and we're talking, how do we be more conservative in the long run, which may disqualify them at the point of sale right now. And so that balancing act is really, really hard, and so I don't know if there is any answer, but sometimes we lose sight of what happens after the purchase that can impact the families as well.
We are seeing in our rehab program, for those who are not, currently do not have a mortgage, we're seeing them choose not to get homeowners insurance either. And of course, we can't fund a project without there being a policy on that home. We have to protect our investment. So we're seeing that all the time. So we're talking older homeowners typically. They've paid off their home. They are uninsured. What a tremendous risk that they're putting themselves in that asset. And so that's become a challenge. We'll sometimes, procure a builder's risk policy, things like that, to help be able to get through a project, with them committing to, they can't get insurance because they need a new roof, right, as an example. So we'll put a builder's risk policy on it until the roof is done, but they're then required, of course, to go out and get insurance at that point. So we're seeing people not choose to get their rehabs done because of that burden.
And it's not just insurance, though, it's also taxes.
Yeah.
You buy a home, as a first-time buyer, you buy a home from someone who's been living in that house for 30 years, the taxes are artificially low, and a year from now, 2 years from now, their tax bill triples, and that also,
Yeah.
And with increased interest rates and other inflationary issues, not only home ownership, it increases rental, because that landlord doesn't have the benefit of homestead exemption. Taxes go up, insurance goes up, maintenance goes up, rent goes up.
Right.
So it's just the cycle is just unbelievable.
And not to keep being Debbie Downer here, but then we're also hearing too new, legislation requiring a certain amount of reserve for those that homeowners associations, so I think townhomes, et cetera, condos as well. Those reserves are going up. People are seeing extraordinary increases in homeowners association fees.
absolutely.
Or being required to pay an amount in order to get roofs replaced, which is in addition to their HOA fees. So we're getting calls such as those. We cannot, in fact, we got a call not long ago about that very issue. I can't remember, but I think it was a condo association, and homeowners were being asked to provide some dollar amount that most were unable to come up with. We could not figure out a way to support that project, to alleviate those homeowners. We contacted the state would not allow it. So, many challenges out there. Those, I think, are some of the other things when we think of partnerships. Like, how are we going to address some of these new challenges that are hitting people every single day to help keep them in their home?
Well, I think the missing middle is the ADUs, and rezoning will be helpful in creating some rental units. Density bonuses to new developers for increased density, as long as they're affordable, but again, you've got to monitor that. So there's some options out there, but we have to evaluate them in great detail, because the cost of it could exceed the benefit.
Yeah.
So we have to consider, so.
And it's really difficult. I feel that missing middle when it comes to rental puts an even greater pressure on you, because a lot of those missing middle commercial sites, 4 units, 6 units, don't qualify for other types of subsidy, don't qualify for penny, don't qualify
tax credits.
tax
right?
credits, all of those sorts of things. And so subsidy that has to come into those missing middle-sized deals puts even more pressure on you. And as far as how do you do a development subsidy that it makes sense for the smaller developers to want to build those units, and that is something I think that we'll have to look at in structuring where are you
Right.
choosing to put your rental subsidies.
And, this has been to your point, this has been a big part of the discussion with our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee over the years. How do we encourage other developers to enter this game? And usually there's smaller developers that can't handle the kinds of projects that our low-income housing tax credit developers would handle, right? I mean, getting into the LIHTC program is, we think that the work that we're doing and that you all support us with is, the art and science of really complex work. But once you get into the low-income housing tax credit arena and compete for those, that's a different kind of developer. So outside of those groups of very sophisticated developers, how do we support these developers that might be coming in under Live Local or might be interested in doing those, those 4 or 10 unit projects without the experience to back them up, and then take on the income qualifications and the monitoring requirements and all those other things. While I can appreciate the discussion that always occurs at the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee on this topic, the devil's in the details, and it's to your point, it's extraordinarily difficult not only for the developer but for us to support that developer in order to get those kinds of projects constructed. I also failed to mention planning and development is finalizing a contract with a consulting firm to take on new zoning, changes to community development code for the North Greenwood CRA area with the intention to densify that area as well, particularly along the MLK corridor in that neighborhood. And so, I would imagine we'll see, reduced setbacks, we'll see some increased height where it's appropriate, those kinds of things to be able to support that densification that goes perhaps beyond our density bonus, right? So we'll see. Nothing's ever easy. Great discussion. Anything else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm now going to open public comment for this item. I'll begin with those present at the meeting. If anyone wishes to come forward, please step to the podium, state your name, and spell your last name for the clerk. Seeing no one come forward, Ms. Call, do we have any e-comments? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Lane, Director's Report. Do you have anything additional to report?
Just a couple things. As you all know, this is a 7-member board. We're down to 6 board members. Carmen Santiago is no longer serving on the board. She's not here, but I want to publicly thank her for her service to the board. She is the only one other than Kevin that has been here longer than me. I know she prided herself on learning things at the dais and bringing them back to her community. So just special thanks to Ms. Santiago for her service. Denise mentioned policies and procedures. Don't need to talk about that. And she also talked about the state leading the effort and doing some things, and one of them is evaluating our incentives, right? And this has been really effective for us because they took a really, really good look at our website, and they're making some recommendations as to how we can make some improvements to our website. And it falls in line with a lot of the things that you, when serving on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, have asked us to do. So it's really, really good timing for us to do some good things with our website and to really get the stuff out there that needs to be out there. We have a marketing manager in our office that used to just work on the economic development side of our department. She is now helping out on both sides of our department. So she is helping out in that effort to get our website where it needs to be. So very, very happy about that. The Archway project, 81-unit affordable housing tax credit project, that went to the CRA yesterday in a work session to extend some deadlines for them by 3 months. They're ready to go. They're receiving project-based vouchers. That requires that HUD does a subsidy layering analysis. Archway got them all the stuff they needed, I think, in December, and HUD still hasn't finished that. So that's really the only thing that we're kind of hung up on. Project will happen. It's in good shape. One thing I didn't mention earlier that I wanted to, the Technical Review Committee, which Kevin serves on, his experience in the nonprofit sector is really beneficial to this committee. Ms. Call sits on it as well. That committee has always been tasked with meeting once at the end of the process and reviewing all the applications, and that's how we develop our recommendations, right? We're going to add an additional technical review committee meeting to meet and discuss the applications prior to the April NAHAB meeting, when the organizations will do presentations. That will give the technical review committee an opportunity to bring questions, to prepare questions for this board, and those questions will come through Kevin. So I think it's a good addition that we have that extra meeting, and then they'll meet again later for the same purpose to review and score. So I think that's an improvement to the program. I will send that ADU document to you all that Denise asked me to. But for that concludes my comments, unless you have any questions. Thank you.
Do any board members have any final words before we adjourn?
It's overwhelming, to say the least. I appreciate your report, Denise. It was the second time I heard it. I learned as much or more the second time around than the first. I just can only say that whatever we can do as a board to move these projects through, I hope we're all in consensus that we really care. And we'll just move forward in that regard as time goes on and hopefully bring some good result.
Yes.
This concludes our business for the day. Our next NAHAB meeting is scheduled for March 12th, 2024. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.